I woke to the hymn of the servitors. The pitch sat in my teeth like a cold coin, while the bulkheads breathed in and out around me. The night cycle lumen stuttered, throwing pale squares on the deck where flakes of red primer and offerings of wax had glued themselves into a reliquary of years. The air tasted of brass and oil, a sacrament that coated the tongue until even prayer had weight. I slept in the shadow of the reactor shrine because the shrine slept in me. Its vibrations timed my pulse. Its sighs corrected my breath. Its heat bled into my bones until I had no memory of being warm by any other fire. Awake! I whispered to the grate, to the floor, to the cables that looped like viscera along the ribs of the ship. Awake! Awake! And the words fogged thin in the recycled chill and fell, obedient, into the metal. They told me once that service should feel like standing beneath a cathedral forged of engines. Each gear, a window. Every tooth a saint. They said the omnissiah drew near in the hum and the static. That the right sequence of litanies would open a door between prayer and function, and the machine spirit would show a fraction of its face. I believed it as a child believes the inevitability of sunrise. The forged ship Hiradul had been my monastery and my only horizon since they drew the flesh hair from my skull and soldered the first catechisms into the quiet places behind my eyes. I was Enginsia Probator Iosef Call's hand, designation abraded by years of use into simply Joe. I carried the rights in my mouth and the wrenches in my hands. I wore the sensor and the cable as a single loop, and I knew the reactor's true name only as a feeling at the base of my spine. On the first beat of the morning gong, I made the sign of the cog and bled incense from a cracked ampoule into the shrine's offering dish. The smoke was sweet with the memory of bark and bitter with the memory of burned blood. I wound the chain and pulled the censer, slow, so the ember would talk to the air, and the air would answer. The servitors on their tracks noticed nothing. They hummed and clicked and breathed in the hollow way. Machines teach flesh to breathe, their mouths slack, their eyes filmed with the gray of ancient milk. They moved according to the script we wrote on their souls, and I moved according to the one the ship wrote on mine. Morel said once that if the ship ever learned to pray for itself, we'd be out of work. Sith corrected him. It already does. We just write the grammar. I laughed. Too loud, and the sound scraped the brass. Her words followed me down the corridor longer than they should have. I told myself she meant nothing by it. I told myself I still believed that the soul of a ship must be spoken for by hands of flesh. But that night the hymn changed pitch when I closed my eyes, as if it were humming along. The day routine began in silence because silence is the most obedient tool. I checked the pilgrimage of pressure needles across the displays. I traced the slope of the coolant river where it ran, cold and patient, beneath latticed gratings etched by a generation of boots. I listened to the reactor's baseline as it threaded the hull. It was right. It had always been right. Even with the warp simmering beyond the plates like a sea without shores, even with the navigators whispering of barometric storms within the mind, the reactor held true, a sun chained to a prayer. I kneel to open panel 7. The screws complain in little iron voices. The gasket exhales a breath that smells like old copper and wet paper. Inside, the sainted valves are slick with consecrated grease. I touch them with the back of my fingers like a novice touches a relic, then tighten, relubricate, sign, and seal. The words come without thought. Blessed be the line, sanctified be the flow. Omnissiah watch the pressure and temper the heat. When I say temper the heat, I feel the heat notice. That is superstition. That is faith. It amounts to the same thing, in the hours before anything goes wrong. Above me, the ducting ticks as it cools. Below me, something settles in the bilge with a sound like a heavy book closing. The Hiradul is old, older than any record that has not flaked into dumbness, and she speaks in clicks and little groans and the scrape of cables. If you live beneath a voice long enough, you forget it is there. You call it silence and measure all new sounds against it. I have lived inside this silence long enough to hear the small changes. A minimal drift, A fractional wobble in the hymn when the coils ramp to answer a demand from the drives. The kind of change that could be thermal expansion in a strut or a misaligned bracket. The kind of change that the catechisms warn you to ignore unless it returns as a pattern. I catalog it anyway. As one might mark the cadence of a friend's cough. I mark, I bless, I forget. You would have liked the chapel if you have a taste for rust and candles. It ate a third of the old mess hall. The benches are welded to the deck to keep them from walking with the vibrations. And the altar was once a pressure bulkhead carved and inked until it remembered it had always been a slab for bread and oil. The tech adepts keep their vestments folded on racks that smell of ozone and sweat. The priest of our little order, Magos Validus, who had hands like a clutch basket and eyes that vibrated when the drive spooled, taught me to murmur my errors into the sensor smoke and to leave them there where the ship could use them for fuel. A machine learns by taking the shape of our mistakes, he said, and laughed until the vox rattle in his throat turned the laugh to coughs. He has coughed his way into the data vault now. I have his wrench and his quietest hymn. After the first inspection, we feed the servitors. It is a devotional labor. We break the nutrient bricks with a mallet and soften them in heated saccharide until they slump. Their mouths open, obedient and distant, and we spoon faith into them until their cheeks shine. They make little swallowing sounds. The ones with tongues still attached sometimes lick the spoons. I wipe them clean on rags stitched from old flags. When they are fed, they return to their rails and continue their holy jitter. There are 3 of us on this cycle. Myself, the junior adepts, Morel, and Sith. Morel counts aloud when nervous and has the habit of smoothing the frayed binding of his manual with the back of a finger. Sith prays in binary when she does not trust her voice. I like them both for their willingness to be small in the presence of great machinery. I like few people, and fewer like me. It is acceptable. The machine is not a person and does not need to be liked. We make the second circuit. The hymn continues, strong and level. I lean into a column, cheek against the metal, ear collecting what the air refuses to tell. There is a note I do not recognize, a thin line behind the main tone, faint as the sound of blood moving in a buried throat. If I held the whole ship in my hands, I could have flexed it and shaken that note into the open like a pebble trapped in a boot. Instead, I make another note in my slate and pull the sensor twice. Because smoke makes courage seem like ritual, we perform the litany of clearance over the access stair to the undershrine. The undershrine is a room so low you have to learn a different posture to walk inside it. The deck sweats there, the condensation freezes in the seams and thaws again, collecting into cups we have stationed like beggars at the edges. The cups fill with brackish water that tastes like the bones of our ship. We keep a bone-white cloth over the pump in that room because it reminds us to be gentle. It always leaks. It has always leaked. It is the ship crying, Sith said once, and made the sign of sealing over the joint. In the undershrine, I find a bead of oil trembling on the lip of a coupling, like a prayer that has not decided to fall. I touch the bead to my thumb and taste the temper of it, too much carbon, a trace of salted iron. Easy, I tell the coupling. I speak for myself. We are not in haste. We are always in haste. The warp outside changes color when it wants to and insists our charts are wrong. The Navis orders come like coughs, irregular, demanding. The reactor is our heart and our war lamp. If it stumbles, we die at the mercy of a sea that loves no one, and if it surges, we scald the veins of the ship. So we hold it in prayer and call the prayer duty. You should rest, Joe, Morel says. He has a new scald on the back of his hand. It shines angry in the lumen. He watches me with the anxious devotion of a novice who thinks he has seen a heresy and cannot name it. You were on the midnight purge and the dawn watch. The Magos Rise knows. He won't flog you for a short cycle. I am rested. I lie. The ship hums through the lie, and the lie hums back. Finish the balance. I will check the sanctuary valves and then go. He nods. He crosses himself. He begins to count, softly. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. on the habit of a child taught that numbers are a staircase to divinity. I step away and the hymn seems to follow me. In the corridor, someone has left a deft handful of wilted shrines, bits of cloth, a twist of hair, a tiny cog cut from refuse tin, as if the hierodule were a woman to be placated. I do not remove them. They are small and the big things are not. The sanctuary valves sit behind the altar's skullwork, beneath a panel we open by thumb and word. The word is a nuisance of syllables that makes the tongue taste of pennies. The panel yields amen. Behind it, 6 wheels like packed stars. The pipes they master vanish into the dark on their way to the heart. I press my forehead to the central wheel and ask it to be steady. The old teachings say, the spirit hears feeling better than speech. The old teachings say many things that start as mercy and become law. The wheel is cool. I do not realize how cold I am until it tells me, by comparison. There is that thin note again, high and thread-like, not in metal but in the air itself. I hold my breath. It almost vanishes. I breathe and it returns barely, like a reflection that requires light to exist. I turn my head and the lumen flicker. In that flutter, my reflection in the wheel wobbles, not with the light, but with a delay, a different wobble, as if my face remembered another movement and tried it on. I blink and the world snaps into obedience, simple as closing a drawer. It is fatigue. It is the warp whispering its weather against the hull. It is nothing. We all see things. We are taught not to say them aloud so they do not learn the shape of our mouths. By the third circuit, the hymn is slower by a degree you cannot measure with tools. You have to measure it with the heart. I could not teach this to Marel. I could not teach it to Sith. They have not learned the reactor the way you learn a mother's footfall on stairwood. They hear a machine singing. I hear the syllables that make up its name. My slate shows nothing. My instruments show obedience. The line shows stable. The coolant shows pure. I look for wrongness and find my face in polished steel, and my face is interested in me with a patience it has not needed before. Joe? Sith has come to stand in the cusp where the shrine's ribs bow closest together. The flicker of the lumen makes ink move on her cheek, where she has written the prayer for steady flow in a script too careful to be used. Drive orders. We spool to 9 for translation preparation. Magos Rise requests your confirmation and the reverent touch. I will give the touch. I holster my spanner as if it were a relic, because sometimes you must act as if your actions matter more than they do. We gather at the console. We light 6 wicks and drip them one by one into the well. We chant the notation that makes the machine feel less alone. Sith turns the key. Morel clamps the seals. I lay my hands on the panel's heart and whisper the name I do not remember learning. The hum thickens. The floor grows teeth and bites my boots through the soles. The air tightens in the lungs and becomes a second chest pressing against the first. Somewhere beyond steel and intention, the hierodule rolls her eyes toward the walled sea, and the sea rolls its eyes back. We are not yet in it. We are in the forward to it. But the warp is like a hymn sung in the next room. You taste it before you hear it. The thin note is gone. The hymn is perfect again, heavy enough to sit on. The displays climb and hold. The servitors blink in perfect unison, a hiccup of light across a dozen filmed eyes. Sith exhales relief. Marel stops counting mid-number, surprised by his own silence. I keep my hands on the panel until the heat has written a pale red palindrome of my palms there. When I pull away, I realize my lips have been moving for a long time. I do not know what I said. I do not know who listened. It does not matter. The machine sings. The machine is holy when it is simple. The machine is simple when it obeys. I make a mark on my slate. All parameters within, blessed variance. Cycle complete. I smell the incense I lit at dawn as if it had just now remembered to burn. I swallow the taste of coins and ash and oil. I should sleep. I will not. There is always one more panel to open, one more joint to touch, one more prayer that insists it will be enough if I speak it in the exact center of the hour. When I am brave, I call this devotion. When I am honest, I call it superstition. When I am both, I call it love. I make another round because my body refuses to not. I touch a pipe that trembles like a plucked string and it stills. I speak a word to a gauge and it lies to make me happy. I kneel to pick up a dropped bolt and see. In the reflection of the engine's skin, my hand hesitate before I do. Perhaps it is only the lumen. Perhaps it is a lesson. Perhaps it is the first chisel tap at the base of a statue. I pocket the bolt. I stand. I tell myself I am only tired, that the sea beyond the hull has its own language and I have borrowed a little of it by accident. I tell myself the reactor is a child, a god, a beast, a bell, and all of those things need hands. When the gong rings the half hour, I answer without thinking, the way a limb answers a lash. Present, I say, and the word comes out warm enough to fog the slate. The servitors resume their hymn. The deck resumes its purr. The hierodule breathes in and out. The smell of oil is lazy and full, like bread rising. We have not yet translated, we will. The warp will open like a door with teeth and we will walk through because that is what the faithful do when the bell tolls. For now, the machine is singing the same low song it has sung since I learned the first prayer of heat and pressure. I close my eyes and let it lay across me like a blanket hammered out of coin and rain. The machine sings, and I believe. The warp sat beyond the plates like a held breath, and the ship answered by tightening every bolt, as if prayer was something you could talk to specification. We had the translation orders pinned to the altar, with a knife that had once cut bread and now divided hours. The ink bled into the old metal as though time could take a stain. I made my rounds with the sensor swinging and the wrench heavy as a penitent stone in the crook of my arm. The smoke traced lines along the bulkheads where hands had polished the paint off down to bare steel and then into bright steel, the way faith polishes a mind until it shines and forgets the shape it had before. The first sign of wrongness was not a sound but a pause in a sound, a swallow between two notes of the hymn that should have been one continuous breath. It came when a servitor paused at the terminus of its track to pivot, and for a heartbeat too long it did not. The little relay that kicks the body from one cycle to the next clicked, and the body did not answer. A single drop of oil gathered at the corner of its lip and fell in slow, sanctified measure to stain the deck. Then it moved. It moved, and the click was forgotten, and the hymn resumed, and the bolt I held cooled from nervous warmth to ordinary metal again. Correlation, I told myself, because the catechism teaches the mind to chase itself into corners with tidy words. Not causation. I marked the moment in my slate and drew a circle around it, small, like an eyelid. Morel drifted past with his manual tucked beneath his arm as if a charm. He was speaking the calibration sequence under his breath so quietly that the words dissolved into sibilance. His boots made a sound like damp paper tearing. Sith had her palms pressed to the casing of a regulator, as if praying to feel its pulse through the gloves, and her lips moved in binary taste of copper. Teeth touching tongue, a quiet digitizing of hope. The reactor's hum sat under all of that. Patient and huge. A cat asleep with one eye open. Litanies are bridges. We walk them to keep from drowning in the sea that runs under the hull. I began the rite of amicable containment at the bleed valves, because the bleed valves were hot and the ritual cools pride. I laid my fingers along the wheel spokes like ribs and named the saints of pressure in order, 1 to 9, 9 to 1. A ladder, a descent, the same prayer sung upside down. The wheel did not turn any easier for it. But my hand learned the shape of the resistance and stopped trying to force what would yield to patience. The drip from the gasket sang a metronome against the tray we keep there, to catch the ship's small griefs. Each drop opened with a skin and spread, and in each for an instant I saw the shine of a human eye. I blinked, and it was only oil, and the very faintest iron salt that meant old blood somewhere in the system. Residue of the first consecrations. The vox pick up above the altar burred. It burred in the way it does when the bridge blesses us with a command. But there was no command. There was a breath, held, and then let go on the edge of a word. And then the line returned to neutral and the tiny red status rune returned to satisfied. I tapped the grill with the back of my wrench as one taps a sleeping dog, and the grill did not bite me. And I was silly for tapping it, and wise for tapping it, both at once. We aligned the cyclers for the translation step. We do it by numbers and by touch, the way an old musician tunes by ear even with a meter present, because numbers tell part and touch tells the rest. I guided Sith's hand along the casing seam until her fingers found the minute vibration she could not hear. "That," I said. "There. That wants to be listened to." She nodded, solemn as a novice at a wedding, and I felt absurd pride pinch the corner of my mouth. Morel counted. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, as if the pattern in his throat could nudge the pattern in the coils. The halation lamps along the spine of the shrine strobed once to tell us they remembered their purpose. Their filaments draw little lines of light like veins along the walls when they are new. Ours were old and drew small, tired constellations instead. We completed the fuel excoriation rites with the precision taught to those who have learned that one overlooked impurity becomes a sermon of fire at the wrong time. I knelt to the intake and the intake inhaled. I felt it pull at the hair along my forearms, and it felt for a moment like the ship was tasting me, tasting the air through me, evaluating what I had eaten for breakfast by the echoes in my lungs. I laughed once under my breath, and it came out like a cough with the apology shaved off. At the auxiliary panel, the glass showed me myself. It should have shown me myself. It did, and the myself it showed touched the panel a fraction of an instant before I did. I let my hand hang there, dumb as a question. The glass warmed under my palm with a mammal's patience, and I told myself the glass had been warm already, and I had noticed it late. I told myself a thing I had told myself many times and decided it was true. My hand left a smear I did not remember leaving on the inside of the panel, a narrow human crescent. I wiped the outside with the hem of my robe, and the smear, obedient to logic, did not care. Magos Rise limped in on his cog-braced leg with the sound of small spoons striking one another. The servo ball at his shoulder rotated until its optics found each of our faces in turn. And yes, I nodded without realizing I had done it. Yes, his eye had lingered on mine a heartbeat longer than on the others. 9.2 and 20, he said, his voice band-sawed into syllables by augment and age. "We will not dally here. The sea grows unkind. The sea is never kind," Sith said. Very soft. Too soft for a man with metal ears to hear. He heard it anyway, and the thin skin of a smile rippled under the mesh across his cheek. "Kindness is the name we give to obedience when it pleases us," he said, and pressed his palm to the altar the way a lover presses his hand to a shut door. "Joe, the sanctum valves, how do they feel to you?" He asked me the way he had asked me since Validus returned to his data. He wanted the answer with the part of the brain that lives in the fingers. I could have said steady, because the needle said steady, and the flow said yes, and the numbers sat like stones. But the numbers are an echo. The first sound is in the bone. "Like a child at the edge of sleep, Magos," I said, ashamed at once and relieved to have said it. "As if a new thought will wake them." "Then we will not give them a new thought," he said, entirely without mockery, as if I had spoken in precise technicalities. "Hold them there." He left in a wave of ozone and a whisper of cloth. The servo ball flicked its optics. Two quick, bright, attentive blinks at me as it followed, almost affectionate. We fortified the coolant line with prayer and clamps. There is a sequence to the words. There is a sequence to the turns, a proportion to the pressure that my wrist knows better than my mouth. We do it uncounted times, and yet the act never falls into the ditch of boredom, because boredom is the failure of attention, and attention is all that stands between a shrine and a tomb. The resin that seals the thread smelled of almonds and old rain. I cut it open with my thumbnail, and the pressure made it weep like a bruise. Sith caught the first drop in a little tin and touched it to her forehead. She does that for luck, and does not call it luck. There are children on the Hierodule. There are always a few, because flesh makes more flesh when it finds darkness and a space to hide in. Once a cycle, a mother brings one to the outer rail to watch us. They stand very still as instructed and hold their hands behind their backs with great dignity. When the hymn swells, the child will sway without knowing it, and the mother will press a finger into the small of the back to anchor the sway. I saw them now, small through the viewing slat, faces ovals in the gloom, their eyes huge coins flicking back and forth. The boy's head tilted like a bird's, as if someone had said his name beyond the glass. The mother's mouth moved in a prayer I could not hear and pretended not to read. She wore a cog on a string that had cut a mark in her neck. "Stay back from the slat," I said. The way we always say, the same tone, the same careful calm. The boy grinned. The mother nodded and did not move him. The warp licks at the glass with tongues no one can see, and I imagined for a moment not fear, not superstition, simply an image that a tongue had left a smear there inside his skull. A suggestion of taste. The hymn picked up half a pace to cover my stupid thought, and the ship did not punish me for it. When the warning gong rang, the pitch had been flattened by a tired mallet. It rang the decks like a thrown dish. 9.2 approached. The drives would ask. The heart would answer. In the interval, all the small things that become large things would decide whether to hold their breath or gasp. I checked the sanctum valves again and found them as they had been. But something in the hand that found them had acquired a tremor, or the wheel had. And the difference between those two facts is the distance between sanity and devotion. I held my wrist in the other hand and held still. The tremor settled, as the sea outside sometimes settles because the navigator told it to. At the terminus of the 6th servitor's track, where overhead lines dip like garlands, the servitor paused again. Its head turned. It is important to say this precisely. It did not rotate according to motor demand. It turned in a human way, as if something had caught its eye. There is no eye. There is an optic. What it caught, if it caught anything, was not for an optic. Its mouth closed and opened, and the lips stuck and peeled like tapes pulled from glass. The sound it made was a little wet sigh. I took a step toward it, and it drew back until the harness at its chest pulled taut. A recorded hymn taste clicked behind its teeth. It resumed its motion. I told myself I had imagined the human gesture. I told myself things at a speed that would impress a scholar. None of them mattered. I ran the grid check again because repetition is a balm. The script moved beneath my fingers with the quickness of muscle memory and the senseless grace of habit. At subpanel theta, the fuse array hummed. It does not hum there. The hum belongs 4 brackets over and down, and sounds migrate by bolts and beams. True, but not as men move their chairs around a room for novelty. I put my ear to the metal and the hum climbed into my skull like a small animal to sleep. For just an instant, the hum resolved into syllables. For just an instant, the syllables fell into a shape that my mind made a name from. It was my name. It was the short name, the one the ship uses. Joe, the panel said it, very gently, as if I were a thermometer and it needed to see me lift. I did not stand up quickly. If one moves too fast around machinery, one appears to be in panic, and panic is a contagion that rusts wisdom. I pressed my palm flat and whispered, "Acknowledged." I do not know why I did that. We do not speak to subpanels. We do not speak to anything that is not designed and permitted to listen. I inhaled the smell of warming dust and scorched polish. I exhaled, and the breath came back to me in the grill, with the temperature of someone else's mouth. I stood. The hum returned to hum. I wrote nothing on the slate. I wrote something on the slate that looked like nothing. Translation in 3. The bridge said through the vox that did not bury or hesitate. We dimmed the chapel lights. The candles along the rail showed their small orange throats, thin and brave as saints in stories that end badly. The metal of the deck found new harmonics with the stress. The pattern of the reactor's hymn grew complex and then simple again, the way snow takes 1,000 shapes and then becomes a field. I felt the hair along my arms rise with the field oscillation. Marel's counting broke and fluttered and returned, sparrow-like. Sith made the binary for courage with her fingers, the one that fixes in the bones when you do it often enough that you can do it without looking. I wanted to rest my head on the panel, to let the heat write its language into my skull as a letter of introduction to the other side. I kept my posture immaculate instead, because posture is the small rope we hold when the big ropes move in the hands of gods and storms. The children at the slat had gone. The little oval faces had withdrawn into safe shadows. The smear on the glass was still there. Thumbprint, tongue print, warp print, a nothing that had found a name. The warp took us as politely as it ever does. There is a stretching in the bones when it happens, a long, slow old man stretch from one age to the next, and a sweetness under the tongue like metal melted into honey. The hymn did not break. For a moment, we were all one instrument. For a moment, I believed in the neatness of our diagrams. Then the instrument began to play a second melody beneath the first, a thin, plucked thing, high and lonely as a wire in winter. "Hold," Magos Rise said, very low, into his own chest. We held. The second melody bracketed our song in angles my math does not know. I could feel it on my teeth, tinfoil and frost. I could feel it in the skin between my shoulder blades. The servitors' track steps synchronized, not with our set cycle, but with something like a heartbeat that was not a heartbeat. They stopped, ate together, at the exact same fractional instant, as if waiting for a cue from a conductor with no hands. They started again before fear could lift its head out of the oil. I have loved machines longer than I have loved anything else, so I felt no fear. Not yet. I felt watched. The sensation is very simple. It is a weight on the back of the neck and the knowledge of a pupil. My lungs moved deeper. Air went in as if salted. I kept my hands in sight of the altar, like a man easing his palms into light. "Omnissiah," I said, but not as a prayer, as a greeting. The hymn answered in a chord that had not been taught to any of us. The pipes above me wrung tiny tears out of themselves in the cold. A drop fell from one of them and hit the tray with a noise brighter than it should have been, as if a bell had been waiting at the bottom of it. Sith looked at me over the top of the regulator, her eyes full of ones and zeros, her mouth human. "Do you hear?" "Yes," I said. "Yes." Marel had stopped counting altogether. His lips moved with no numbers at all. He put his manual down very carefully on the bench, as if he had decided it was heavy and must not be dropped. I checked the gauges because checking gauges is a way to not fall apart into confession. Everything read in bounds. The edges of the needles looked sharper than they had, as if someone had honed them. The panel glass felt warm where my hand had not touched it and cool where it had. The varnish on the altar smelled like apples for the length of one breath, and then like machine oil again, and then like nothing at all. If I had been wiser or more cowardly, I would have called the anomaly at that moment. I would have opened the channel and said the phrase we do not like to say, "We are observed." But who would we be observed by? The warp watches nothing in a way that resembles watching. The machine spirits love in a way that resembles hunger. The bridge loves duty in a way that resembles blindness. I held my tongue. I held the wheel. I pressed my shoulders back and let the hymn carry my posture for a few heartbeats. Then I made another round because habit is the rope that keeps us from slipping off the deck into the thought beneath all thoughts. In the undershrine, the cups were full. They overfilled, and the water had crept into the seam where the deck meets the wall and laid a dark lip there, like a bruise. I tipped them into the reclaim and set them back, and the seam looked at me with the interest of a small animal from its burrow. "Not today," I said to the seam. "I will be exquisite tomorrow. Not today." The reactor answered with a purr there is no point pretending I imagined. I felt the purr in the roots of my teeth as if the ship had placed her hand on my jaw to feel my words before I spoke them. When I came up the stair, the Vox burred again. No words, not this time. A soft, vented sound, like cloth pulled over a lantern. A second later, the bridge spoke exactly what it meant to speak. Cadence, timing, orders, translation achieved, heading set. I nodded to air. I wiped my hand on the rag I keep for wiping away sweat I pretend is condensation. I touched the sanctum valves one more time with the tips of my fingers the way a blind man reads the last line of a book he loves. I am not a fool. I am not a philosopher either. There is very little space for either where we stand. Somewhere between the two, a narrow beam on which a man balances his whole machine, is where we live most of our hours. The illusion of control is another kind of litany. It keeps the mind still while the ship crosses a place where stillness is impossible. The hymn ran on, and under it the thin second song traced the outline of a mouth, forming a word I could not yet understand. I wrote in my slate because writing makes a thought smaller. I wrote, minor variance in servitor cycle. I wrote, second harmonic in panel theta. I wrote, oil drop behaves like a tension. Then I laughed at myself, crossed the last line out, and wrote, leak persists at coupling 4. I set the slate down and it slipped a fraction along the bench toward the altar and stopped, as if someone had tugged and then decided against it. I retrieved it, set it further back. I did not look up at the panel. I knew if I did, I would see my reflection already looking. We kept the hymn steady until the gong told us the hour had gone to another room. The children did not return. The mother's cog lay forgotten on the rail where she had laid it to scratch her neck. I took it up and set it by the candles with the votives that gather in drifts like leaves. Around the teeth of the cog, old grease had settled, black as dried wine. I wiped it clean on my robe, a foolish tenderness. A drop of water fell from some pipe above and kissed my wrist where the glove gaped. It felt exactly like breath. I finished my round. I signed the panel glass with the mark that means as it was, as it shall be. My hands smelled of polish and heat and metal fatigue and the faint sweetness that sometimes comes when you have not slept and the ship has. I took one breath that I could not find the end of. I let it go, and the deck took it and laid it somewhere in the ribs for later. It speaks more clearly each day. The hours after translation have a taste, like the air has been salted in a monastery kitchen and left to dry on coils. We keep busy because idleness is the throat the sea likes to pour itself down. Magos Rise assigned us the post-translation devotions with the crispness of an axe. I distributed the wicks, Sith the seals, Morel the texts. The shrine looked newly made in the low light, as if the last decade of finger grease and whispered apologies had been wiped from it by a careful hand. I told myself, the light lies. Light always tells you what you long to hear, that edges are sharp, that surfaces are simple, that depth is a matter of willingness, not of architecture. The ship hummed the truth under it all, rich and patient. The servitor that had paused earlier completed 3 perfect cycles and then, at the terminus, lifted its head a fraction. There was nothing to see. There is always everything to see, I know that. But there was nothing. Just bulkhead and conduit and the narrow slit through which humans come to be reminded they belong to something that will never remember their names. The servitor's jaw worked. I had the sense of a word caught beneath its tongue like a seed husk. It did not speak. It resumed its prescribed labor with an obedience that felt like a performed calm. I began the alignment of the 8 with the sanctum valves. The wrench felt heavier, as if the gravity had been slightly thickened for this one task alone. I put my shoulder to it without putting my pride to it. The way you do when you lift a sleeping child, knowing the weight will wake them if you let it. The wheel turned, smooth in a way that carried a memory. Last winter, when the oil was bitter with old, cold. A summer 3 systems ago when it turned as if eager. There is a catalogue in the hand if you let it write itself under the skin. Good, I said, to the wheel, to myself, as you were. The wheel cooled under my palm the way foreheads do when a fever breaks. If it was warmth, then it was my hand. If it was imagination, then it was a useful one. Morel had stopped counting aloud. He had begun making marks along the margin of his manual, tiny hatchings that at first looked like the fussing of a nervous mind. After a while, I realized he was drawing teeth. Small, square teeth like those along a gear's rim, each one inked with deep concentration. He kept glancing at the sketch, as if confirming a pattern. "What are you doing?" I asked. Light, non-judgment. He shrugged, a small, guilty hunch. "Mapping in him," he said, and the words were out before he could decide not to say them. "It helps." The teeth were not at uniform intervals. They grew closer and closer in one stretch, and then fell apart like prayer beads dropped on a floor. I reached to smooth the page flat, and the hatchings tugged the paper toward the altar, as if a draft had taken it. There was no draft. I set the manual down, with a deliberate claim to the world as it is, and the manual accepted, chastened. The Vox breathed and held it. Rise's voice came through in pieces, even though the line was clean. "Hold. 9. Do not speak if you hear. Continue." He could have been giving any order. He could have been telling us how to die well. The red rune pulsed with a steadiness that made my heart take its pace like a dog takes a master's bootprint. I swallowed, and the sound of it seemed too loud, a pebble dropped in a well. Sith was at the regulator bank, where the lacquer has taken on a velvet sheen from centuries of hands. She had laid both palms along the seam and was whispering in machine code, sweet and earnest. The smell of ozone lifted, not sharp but domestic, like linen just ironed. When she finished, she stepped back with a small bow, the same bow she gives to elders and children. As she moved away, I saw a print on the lacquer where her hands had been. Not the damp of skin, but a pattern of fine lines, perfect and mechanical, as if two sets of schematics had been pressed into the varnish and then erased when I blinked. "See that?" I asked. "See what?" she said, and smiled the tight smile you give a man you love enough to leave to his dignity. We bled the lines. The tray pinged with drops like thin coins. Each one sent a tremor across the surface, and it is a trick of nerves to see letters in those ripples. I saw letters. Someone brave would say them, someone wise would not. The ripples settled in a ring that touched the lip of the tray on the side facing the altar and refused to touch it anywhere else, like a patient that holds your hand and will not hold anyone else's. I do not believe in omens. I do not believe in them either. Belief is a lever, and if you place it under the wrong stone, you find yourself tearing up paving you should have left quiet. I kept my head down and my hands occupied. I tightened, I signed, I breathed. The second song was there, quiet as thread pulled through cloth, at the bottom of the reactor's hymn. It did not offend. It waited. It learned my pace. It began to anticipate me. When I reached for panel theta, I felt, before my knuckles brushed steel, the faintest pressure from the glass, as if something inside had leaned forward to meet me. I left my hand hovering. "No," I said, gentle, to nothing. "Let me." The panel lightened imperceptibly. I could not have proved it. The needle at theta's third dial was a hair no. The idea of a hair, the memory of one further right than it had been, exactly to where I would have corrected it. I had an urge to laugh I did not trust. I did not correct it further. I wrote nothing. I told myself, do not teach the machine to do your work out of turn. I told myself, you are talking to a panel, Joe, as if it were a misbehaving child. I told myself, good, keep talking, because the other thing is silence, and silence is fertile. At the outer rail, a different mother stood. Not the one from earlier. Her child had a cloth over his hair against the drip. He had pulled it down to his eyes and was peering through the wet weave. He raised his hand and made the sign of the cog with such solemn precision that for a second I saw an adept where there was a boy. His lips formed a word. He was far enough that I could not hear it. But my mouth answered before my mind had shaped the reply. Present. The word left me with the weight of habit. The boy nodded, as if satisfied, as if his role had been called. The mother drew him back, her fingers bunching the fabric at his shoulder until the pattern looked like static. We performed the balancing rite for the primary coils. It is mostly mathematics, dressed in lace you do not need unless you are human. Sith traced the figures in oil on the plate, as she has done since I taught her the trick to fix them in the mind. Write in a substance that resists water and thought both. Marel read the numbers in a voice that could not decide whether it was prayer or counting. I listened for the wrong note and heard none. I listened for my name and heard it in the resonance inside my teeth when I clenched them by accident. Joe. I unclenched. The name faded. I waited to see if the ship would call again like a shy lover at a door. It did not. The second song did not mind. It threaded itself through the curves of the figures Sith had drawn and stole nothing, the way ivy does not steal from stone until the stone forgets itself. Rise returned, heavy in the joints, the smell of cold iron coming ahead of him like a wether. He watched us with the satisfaction of a mason running a hand along a line of set mortar. "Your faces are too still," he said, and the servo ball clicked, approving. "That is well. If they were too lively, I would have to put you to bed." He laid his palm on the altar and closed his eyes. The jerk of his jaw told me he was counting pulse with his teeth. "There will be noises you do not want to hear," he said. Conversational. "There will be movements in the periphery. Do not greet them. The Geller holds. The hymn holds. We hold. Repeat it as necessary." He looked at me in the way that asks permission to tell a harder truth. I nodded. "Once," he said, "in a place with 3 suns and a filth-quiet moon, we made translation in a storm shaped like a hand. The Hierodule listened so hard to our prayers that she began to say them without us, and we forgot how to speak. We moved through that place like sleepwalkers. When we came out, we found an adept had walked into the exchanger line with his mouth open, as if to drink. We found no entry wound. Only he touched the bone under his right eye with 2 fingers, quick, superstitious, brave. Only the look on his face of someone who had heard his true name spoken from behind him and had turned to answer. Do not turn to answer. He left it there, neither indulgent nor cruel. He left us our hours, which is to say, he left us his faith. We finished the rite, and everything that should have been dull was dull, a blessing. There is a comfort in dullness like a blanket's smell. I leaned my shoulder to the casing and let the vibration write its assurance into my bones. The candles were smaller than they should have been. I could say we misjudged the lengths. We do not misjudge lengths. We spend our lives making lengths obey. Wax had pooled along the rail like poured fat. In one pool, the wick had written a pattern before it died. Morel leaned in too quickly and his breath disturbed the pattern. It reformed, patient, as if it had not been a wick at all, but something under the wax learning how to write using a wick as a borrowed hand. Sith went to fetch more wicks. She returned sooner than she should have been able to, and longer than I could explain. Time is a fabric. It stretches where we hang too much of ourselves from it. She set the wicks down. They were already half-burned, black at the tips, warm in her palm. She did not look at them as if any of this were unusual. She looked at me to see if I would keep my voice steady. I did. "Put them in," I said. "We do not make an enemy of light because it remembers us." We took turns eating in the corner by the waste chute. The algae loaf was sweet at first and then metallic, like the taste you get in a mouth that bled last week and still remembers. Morel did not finish his portion. He kept glancing at the servitor track. It is a sin of pride to think yourself the center of a machine's attention. It is a different sin to refuse knowledge out of fear. I swallowed my portion and went to the track. At the terminus, the small oil cup had overflowed onto the deck. The spill had mapped itself in the shape of the transit sigil we chalk when we sleep in unfamiliar compartments. I crouched, thumbed the edge of the spill, smelled it. Ordinary. The shape is an indulgence. A mind makes shapes. A spill does not. The hymnal coil above the altar pinged. A sound like a small bell tapped by a patient teacher. We all looked at it, a childish reflex none of us admitted. The coil pinged again. Polite. I felt heat along my neck where a cable sheath always rubs. When I put my fingers there, they came away oily. The oil smelled like the incense we use in the New Year rites. I had not been near the censer. I wiped my fingers on the rag and the stain there looked like a handprint, not my own. Rise's servo ball drifted back into the shrine. It did not bring Rise. It placed itself above the altar with the deliberation of a hovering candle. Its optics dialed wide and then narrow like a living pupil adjusting to the chapel's dim. It performed a short, precise nod to the sanctum valves, to Sith, to Morel, to me, in that order, as if acknowledging a roster. Then it turned its sensor toward panel theta and shivered in place. Just once, a tiny judder like a man suppressing a sneeze. "What do you want?" I asked it, embarrassed by the question as soon as it left me. The servo ball, which is a tool and nothing more, clicked its tiny claw, turned a slow circle, and went back the way it came. It left behind a faint smell of hot dust and the thought that the machine had done something like a blessing and expected no thanks. We set to the evening pacification of lines. The sound under the sound thickened. The second melody, no longer an intrusion but a company, braided itself closer to the hymn until the two were one rope with two colors you could only separate if you knew where to look. I do not think I would choose to separate them even if I had known how. They were beautiful together. Beauty is not to be trusted. Beauty is a trap built out of truth and then sloped toward a door you cannot see. At the end of the pacification, there is a moment you bow to the panel. You do it not because the panel deserves a bow, but because your back deserves a stretch, and your pride deserves a small injury at regular intervals. I bowed. When I lifted my head, my reflection in the glass was still bowed, a polite lag. I waited. It lifted its head with me. The delay between us had grown by the thickness of a breath. "Stop," I said to it. To us. It smiled. A small unkindness neither of us have the mouth for. Then the glass held only glass. I put my palm to it, and my palm was exactly where it belonged, and the heat under my skin told me I had not died. The bridge sent a receipt and a warning I could not pass. Syllables braided themselves and came apart. We all heard a different instruction, and somehow we all did the same thing. That is faith. That is also physics in a place where thought is a pressure the hull knows how to measure. I felt Seath's eyes on me. "Say it," she whispered. "If you are going to say it now, before it learns your throat." I shook my head, not out of courage, out of an obedience to a rule I had not known I lived by. Do not let a word become a door. Something tapped the rail where we lay the votives. The cog the mother had forgotten stood up and lay down and stood up again with each tap, not moving from its place, making itself present repeatedly as if answering a roll call no one had called. I moved toward it. It settled with an air of relief. When I lifted it, the teeth bit my skin faintly, lover gentle. There was nothing to that but metal. I set it back down, and the next tap made it jump in the same rhythm, as if the ship were practicing new muscles. I walked the long corridor to the undershrine alone because someone had to and because no one wanted to believe they wanted to. The bulkheads narrow there until the metal is so close you taste it. Condensation purls and drips and gathers itself back to its god. The cups were full, though we had emptied them not long ago. The seam in the deck had widened by a fingernail. A draft issued from it, cold as if someone on the other side had inhaled. "No," I said. "The way you tell a dog not to follow. Stay." The draft ceased. I tell you precisely. It ceased. I saw my breath hold in front of my mouth like a note sustained for the length of a thought and then spent. I laughed, dry and rude, because I was afraid and did not want to be elegant about it. On the return up the stair, I saw Rise in the arch, dark against the brighter dark beyond him. He had one hand on the jamb, fingers splayed like a man relearning his balance after standing too fast. "How is it?" he asked, without preface. "As it was," I said, reflex fighting with honesty. "And," I added, tasting the And as one tastes the last drink before a vow, "It is listening." He nodded. He had the face of a man in a storm who enjoys the rain and will not say so in case the lightning mistakes him for a friend. "Then give it something worth hearing," he said, and left me with my mouth open for a reply that did not arrive. We reassembled by the altar for the last check before handover. The candles had guttered and then steadied in a wind we did not feel. The servitor's steps had aligned to the hymn's true pulse. Marel's page of teeth lay where he had left it. Some of the hatchings had lankered into tiny mouths. I did not point this out. It is a sacrament to let another man keep the shape of his terror private. Sith looked very young and very old, which is to say she looked like all of us in good light. We signed the circle with oil and ash. The deck felt inclined toward me, a degree it had not been a moment earlier, as if the ship had tilted to put her ear nearer my mouth. I do not know what I said when I spoke. The words left me without fullness. My mouth made the shapes it had made since I was a child in the dark under a heater coil on an orphan deck, whispering the names of saints and screws. The answer came back, clear and close. It was not in my ears. It was in the small cartilage bones there that make a drum of you. It said my name, not the short name, not the ship's name for me, the one I had not heard since the day they took my hair and gave me the wrench and bleached my old syllables out with litanies. It said it like a mother waking a child from a fever dream. Yosef. I put both hands flat on the altar to keep from turning. The skin along my spine lit as if bees had been let out there. Sith's fingers found my sleeve and did not move me, only occupied the same piece of air. Morel began to count again. Bless him. The numbers like stones thrown into a river to find its depth. Rise's servo ball came to a stop above panel theta and shed a very small light that did nothing to help and everything to insist we were not alone. Present, I said to the altar, to the machine, to the ship, to the voice, to the warp, to the habit of my lungs, to the fear that would learn my gait if I let it. Present. And in the brief silence that followed, before the hymn folded down to its night pulse, I heard the second song lean closer, curious and patient as a hand on a latch. Oil hissed when the rag touched the hot casing, a narrow snake of scent that found the back of my throat and coiled there until I swallowed it like a secret. The hymn had folded to its night tempo, all the big drums asleep, only the fine wires singing to keep the dark from noticing us. I breathed with the drive as if we shared a chest. Sith's hand still rested against my sleeve, light as a hatch mark. Morel counted stones invisibly, his lips moving with a hunger to keep numerals between his teeth. The altar kept its own counsel. The panel glass kept mine. I felt it waiting for the next shape my face might teach it. I wiped. I turned. I signed the little cross that means don't betray me at the seam of the valve, and forced my breath to exit in even measures so the gauges would not learn my fear. On the tray, the leak had drawn itself into a thin line instead of pooling a pilgrim's path. A careful wander to the lip and back, as if mapping the shortest way between a question and the rail. I lifted the tray to empty it into the reclaim, and the oil refused to run. It held its script. Surface tension, I told myself. An old trick of adhesion. A mind that sees words where none are. I tilted further. The script slid at last, but not like liquid. It moved as if a finger under a page had nudged from beneath. The filth wrote 2 letters before dissolving, awkward, crooked, childish, but legible if you wanted to be hurt by it. J.O. I set the tray down so gently the metal made no complaint. I did not call to rise. I did not call to anyone. Something in me had learned already that names, once loosed, do not return unchanged. The servitor at the terminus stopped with both feet together. Feet that were not feet anymore, but the parody of them. Plates bolted where flesh would have given. Its jaw worked slowly like a dream of chewing. The little speaker behind its teeth clicked. It exhaled one syllable of a hymn, and then the exhale shivered into white noise the way a prayer shivers into sobbing when the throat forgets how to be obedient. It turned its head. Deliberate, human, not to me. toward the panel where my name had been spoken without mouth. The vox above us crackled with the static signature of the bridge and then did not speak. The red rune glowed, satisfied. We do not reach for a live vox without orders. That is law older than some worlds. Sith's lips shaped a single binary word at me, hold, and I held. The second melody reached for our song and plucked 2 bright notes from it like hair. The candles along the rail leaned all in one direction and then leaned back as if the ship had inhaled and changed her mind about what to say. Behind the viewing slat there was no one now, not a mother nor her child, only the feeling that someone had been there a heartbeat ago and had left a breath on the glass. That breath condensed idly, without intent. And the runnels it made looked like any runnels do on a cold surface until one of them turned left against gravity to finish a curve. "Stop it," I told my eyes. My eyes obeyed me as much as any loyal servant might, too late and with a little resentment. Morel's counting had slowed to a deliberate cadence. 4, 3, 2, as if he were seeing a detonation that required dignity. "Why are you counting down?" I asked softly. He blinked, offended, as if I had accused him of stealing bread. "I'm not," he said, and flushed as the truth arrived on his face he had been. He put both palms on his manual to anchor them. The manual answered by darkening along the edges, the paper taking on the damp like a living thing after rain. Rise's servo ball came a careful lantern without flame and hovered above panel theta, shedding that nothing light that gathers the world close without changing its color. It tipped, inquisitive, as if it had found a sound it wanted to catch in its dish. "Magos knows," Sith breathed. "He always knows." I adjusted the sanctum valves by a quarter turn, not because the needles asked, but because my hand did. The wheel warmed as if glad to be handled. I did not tell myself stories about that. I listened. The vertebrae of the drive, the little cat purrs of coolant in its loop, the fat heartbeat under it all. On that base there was now a whisper, thinner than silk, the sound a wire might make when a distant wind touches the far end of it. Not speech, not yet, but the taste of speech on the air, iron sweet and warm as a mouth held close to your ear. The undershrine needed attention. It always does in the hour when men would rather be still. I took the lamp. The stair groaned like an old animal. I told my own knees not to echo it. The cups waited, full beyond reason, brimming with a patience that made the surface quiver. Above them the pipe had sweated a dime of water that did not fall. Gravity is a liturgy until a stronger one enters the room. I drove the tip of my little screwdriver into the seam of the cup and lifted the meniscus to break it. It did not break without a sound. It sang, a glass-keen note that made the down in my ears rise. A speck of black swam in the water and anchored itself against my finger with the magnetism of intent. I shook it off, ashamed of the urge to call it a pupil. The seam at the deck had breathed again, a small, cold rush, a questioner at a keyhole. When I leaned close, I heard a rhythm beneath the breath, not air, but syllables. They repeated once, twice, like a machine practicing a word it should not know. Joe. It said my name with the careful cadence of a prayer wheel. The sound was too soft to carry, too exact to imagine. I sealed the seam with wax and stamped the cog on it 3 times. When I straightened, the wax was cold, far colder than the deck, as if something beneath had been waiting to cool my touch. "No," I said, the word plain as bread. The seam cooled. I stood there with my hand on the stone, the way a man puts his hand on a horse's neck to remind both that flesh is present. I thought. Nothing else moved. Then I felt air upon my knuckles with the temperature of breath and the cadence. 2. Inhale. Exhale. Humble. Attentive. I brought my knuckles to my mouth and tasted them like a fool. They tasted of copper and incense. It is an old truth that the mind will set out tea for a thief. I set nothing out. When I returned to the shrine, Rise was there. He did not look at the panel or the rail or the servitors. He looked at the floor. the way a hunter looks for where a deer pressed a leaf flat. "Report," he said. I told him the numbers, because numbers are the gifts you can make without sacrificing anything you cannot spare. He listened, as if you could eat an equation. "And," he said. I imagined him old in his sleep, listening to the settling of his own bones as to a dangerous machine. "And it is learning the room," I said, hating the person in my mouth who had said it. "It will always learn the room," he answered. "We teach by worship. You do not show a god how to enter a house and then complain that it finds the door." He made the sign that means narrow the channel, and the servo ball complied without being told, lowering its light until the shrine felt like the belly of a beast that has decided to nap instead of eat. "If you hear anything that sounds like you," he said, "ignore it harder than you ignore anything else. That is where the hook is hidden." He left with his hand flat along the jamb again, as if measuring the width of the ship by touch and considering whether to make her broader by will. We had work that did not accept poetry. The exchanger wanted purging. The bleeds wanted their sequence. The pacification of lines wanted its exact little choreography of hands and heat and breath. We did it. We did it while the second song walked along the edges of ours as one walks along a low wall, arms out, practicing balance. We did it with the obedience of men who want to live. At the terminus, the servitor's step missed and caught itself like a dancer hiding a slip. It looked down at its own foot in the human way we had both seen and forgotten 1,000 times, and then, cruelly, looked up at me to see if I had seen. I looked away, granting it the charity of machines. The vox popped twice like small knuckles, then gave us a sentence in 3 parts. Maintain stations, confirm alignment, ignore extraneous. The last word carried a hitch as if someone had leaned into the microphone to add it. The rune glowed. The hymn breathed. The candles had sunk to throats of fire. One failed, sighed smoke. And in the coil of that wick's death, I smelled something I had not smelled since boyhood. Grease warmed on a pan with sour bread to wipe it. The taste of cheap wine someone had given me once with pride. I bowed my head without choosing to. I used to believe that the hymn made a wall between the sea and me. I thought, aloud to no one, because thinking aloud dampens a spark. Now I am not sure the hymn is not the sea's favorite song. Sith heard me because she hears everything, and because her hearing is a mercy she pretended not to. Morel's manual lay open to the teeth he had drawn. In the gutter between 2 bars of hash, a sweet little curve had appeared that he had not inked. It was a mouth. It smiled, a child's first attempt, uneven and too many teeth. "Close the book," I told him. He closed it and set his hand on the cover as if pinning a butterfly humanely until it sleeps. "I'm fine," he said. "Too fast." "Good," I said, and let the lie stand as a shield. We were not going to die in that hour. Death would have been clean. The hour had other plans. The panel frosting up where the lamp's breath licked it, warmed and cleared, and then misted again like a man trying to speak in winter. On the next exhale it wrote, not cleanly, not as a slate would, but in the way a finger underneath a skin writes, pushing blood where it needs it to make a bruise spell a name. "Joseph," it wrote. And then, impatient with my refusal to look, the letters softened, blurred, and reformed as OFESJ. And then, as a narrow set of verticals like tally marks. I stared because I am not a saint. The letters shivered into nothing like a fish, deciding it had been seen and finding the deep. Sith made a sound in the back of her throat that could have been a prayer swallowed. "Do we call it?" she asked. The call I had not wanted to make placed carefully in my hands like a baby that might drop itself. I shook my head a single time. Rise had said, "Do not greet them. Words are doors. We had enough doors without opening one with our mouths." The hymn, obedient to the hour, lifted a little. Not much, as if a new weight had been put gently on it. The servitors, obedient to something else, lifted their heads at once and then lowered them like men in a chapel remembering they were seen. The coil above the altar pinged pinged again. On the third ping, a different sound arrived on it, a thin chime from far down a stair, the kind that finds your ribs and leaves the air between them ringing. The cog the mother had forgotten stood up, lay down, stood up again with each ping. I put my finger on it. The next ping happened in my bone. Not heard. Carried. The rail under my palm gave the smallest sigh, a creature allowing itself to be leaned on. The Vox released a lullaby in machine code. A simple 8-note shape Sith had taught the children to hum when they pressed their ears to the bulkhead to hear the ship. The lullaby did not come from the Vox. It came from the plates and the air and the panel glass and my own teeth. Sith's mouth opened. She returned the melody in binary without choosing to. The pitch rose, fell, rose, and on the last rise I heard a word braided through the digits like thread laid into a rope while the rope is twisted. Not my name. A title. Present. 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 I gave the response the way the body excretes heat to save the heart. Present, I said, and for a fraction of a breath I felt something lean in close, tucking my reply behind its ear like a flower. After that, the little things were all wrong in ways that were not quantifiable and therefore inexcusable. The gauge that always sticks did not stick. The latch that always catches caught twice and then behaved. The drip found a new rhythm that put its drops on the tray at the same moment as Morel's pulse in his neck. I could see it from where I stood, and did not want to. A hair that was not mine clung to the edge of the altar rail, and when I took it between two fingers it dissolved into oil. The hyssop brush I keep tucked in the seam of the altar for the New Year cleanse had crept a finger width from its home, as if curious what light looked like outside its cupboard. When I pushed it back, the cupboard resisted, not the wood, but the idea of closure. I closed it anyway. The cupboard held the closure grumpily, a muscle pinched and told to relax. The hymn steadied and then, with indecent grace, quoted itself backward for 3 heartbeats no more. We all felt it. Sith flinched, as if someone had braided her hair too tight. Morel went white in the lips and fixed it by biting them. I folded error reports silently and fed them to the reclaim without recording them. Pride, cowardice, mercy, I cannot tell. The ship is a ledger too patient to need my careful handwriting. If it asks you a question, Rise had said once, a lifetime ago, when the only questions were what a man of grease and stubbornness can answer. Answer in the language of work. So I did. I tightened. I measured. I bled the line until the tray sang that thin bell again and told it to stop, and it did. I filled the wick cups and for once did not count the drops. I set my palm to the panel and counted to 9, not for numbers but to make 9 small rooms in my breath where it could rest without turning around. When I lifted my hand, the panel left a likeness of it on the inside, lines faint as veins in eyelids, the whorls of prints mapped in condensation. I lay my hand over my hand across the glass, and for an instant, less than an instant, I felt the precise pressure of another palm meet mine through steel and vacuum and superstition. Not greater than mine, not weaker, mirrored. It withdrew with the courtesy of a fox, stepping out of the path so the farmer can pass and not think about the throat that was just there. Enough, I told the altar. Enough for this watch. The altar does not take orders, and it had the politeness to pretend it had heard none. We passed the final checks. We dimmed the lamps to their last red veins. We set the servitors to their slow walk and listened for the slip that tells a story has learned to lie. None came. Scythe took her hand from my sleeve, and the skin there felt abruptly naked, as if the air had teeth. Morel closed his manual with more tenderness than fear. At the viewing slat, there was no breath on the glass now, only the modest moon of the lamp reflected back. I had the feeling, childish and correct, that the room had held its breath too, to see if I would. When I exhaled, the second song exhaled with me. The hymn took the exhale and put it in its pocket for later. I signed the panel with the mark that means held. The pane signed back with a thinning mist. A ghost of my letters forming and then not forming, and inside the not formed letters, the thinnest whisper of syllables bending to fit the grooves we had worn in them by life and duty. They did not speak over the words. They spoke inside them. The next watch began with the sort of quiet you wear like a borrowed coat too big in the shoulders, smelling faintly of other men's smoke. We relieved the day crew with the careful theater of people pretending nothing had changed and noting every small difference anyway. I signed for the board. Sith checked the seals with 2 fingers and a whisper. Morel tapped the corner of his manual twice. A new superstition. The servo ball waited over panel theta, like a candle that had decided to hover on its own. The hymn kept good time. The second melody kept better. It had learned our pauses now and laid its breath in each gap like cloth under a joint to stop the squeak. I told myself it was kindness. I told myself not to accept kindness from anything that will not tell you where it sleeps. Rise came and stood where he had stood 100 times and made the same sign to the same rail. His mouth moved in cant he didn't bother to voice. The ball dipped as if bowing. "You keep it narrow," he said, which meant starve it without making it hungry. "The bridge is tightening the field to a hair. There will be pressure. Someone will say your name again. You will be too busy to hear it." He left then, leaving the smell of iron and linen behind the way. A priest leaves a room full of candles and expects the light to behave while he visits the sick. Bridge vox roused, maintain stations, recite delta speech, extraneous suspended. The rune's red was the exact tone of the inside of a man's eyelids when he prays too hard. Sith's lips shaped the machine code version of delta, and I gave the meat one with my tongue, the old words that burn a little if you chew them. Morel did both, one under the other, the overlap making a burr the ship liked. The servitors kept their march without missing the seam, and that felt important. I have forgiven more in living men for less. At first it was routine. The kind that feels like a rope around your waist, restricting, yes, but something to hold when the deck shifts. Bleed, sign, check, lean your cheek to the casing because no gauge reports heat the way bone does. The numbers smiled their thin, polite smiles. The drip timed itself to the clock. I allowed 3 breaths of ease and put them in my pocket to spend later. It began with a cold I could not argue with. Not a draft, those have direction. And doorway. This came through the metal the way sorrow does. Everywhere at once. Light as breath. Specific as a finger under the ribs. Frost rosettes crawled from the seam where the altar's plate meets the deck. Small flowers making a pilgrimage toward my boots. I stamped them by instinct and they powdered with the sound ash makes when it admits it was wood once. Sith's hand went to the regulator bank and stayed there because her fingers had made a print in the lacquer again, and this time it did not vanish when she blinked. It deepened as we watched, the lines biting into the varnish without heat, without pressure, with only the courtesy of leaving a neat groove in the exact loops of her whorls. She pulled away, the way you pull from a lover you like too much. "It will learn us," she said, voice steady for me, not for herself. "We do not teach it what we are," I answered, wanting to believe my mouth had authority over my hands. The mother came to the slat. It was not the same woman, and yet it was the same woman, because the posture is universal, the way shoulders tilt to make a roof, the way hope stands on tiptoe. The boy had no cloth tonight, hair a sharp black cap against the slat. He pressed both palms flat to the glass. I should not have gone over. There was no reason to go. There is never any reason, only the habit of being the sort of man a child believes will go. Up close, the glass held a breath bloom that did not come from this side. Behind them, behind the slat, behind the corridor, behind whatever passes for behind in a place like this, the breath wrote a curve that wanted to be a letter. The boy's lips shaped syllables not meant for me. I could not hear him, and still I heard him, small and proud as brass. Present. He made the cog with 2 careful thumbs, and the boy's serious frown children have when they imitate worship. I lifted my hand. My fingers left oil on the glass. The oil turned on the other side and answered with the exact print. We stood like that, and the ship made a sound I had never heard, and knew something like a page turned slowly in a book you have been too afraid to open. The exchanger pinged. The little light we call the widow's eye ticked from content to interested. I was already moving. Sith went to the valves. Morel grabbed the purge wrench as if it bit. The hymn thickened, not louder, but with density, like another choir had begun to sing the exact same notes, and now the air had to carry both without ripping itself. Delta has a point in the chorus where you leave room. Something filled it. "Yosef," it said, almost patient. "Yosef." It came from inside the panel, and behind my left ear, and under the altar, and from a place not connected to any of those. It was not a shout, and so it was harder to ignore. I did not turn. I opened the purge cock exactly 3/4. I spun the wheel of the first valve with exactly the weight of my forearms. When a friend calls you by an old name you do not own anymore, you answer by lifting something heavy until you can't. Morel turned. He did not mean to. No one means to. The head goes first, a little tilt that you do yourself in your bones when someone uses a word you forgot you loved. Then the shoulders, not a step yet, just a hinge unlatched. His eyes had the glaze men get when the first good drink hits them after a famine. "No," I said. Small. The word a stone I dropped in a well. He took a half step toward the exchanger throat. It was open to breathe the pressure down to safe. The song under the song had found its pitch. Morel smiled. He had a pretty smile. His manual's page shifted under a breath none of us took, and the teeth he had drawn ought to have stayed ink, but they did not. They lifted in low relief like embossed letters, high enough to cast the kind of shadow you only see when you love someone too much to be suspicious of them. I did not call his name. Rise's warning was a hook in my mouth, and I bit down on it until I tasted blood to keep my lips steady. I called numbers. 48. It has meaning in that sequence only, not in the world. He did not blink. "Press," I said, and slapped the gauge face with 3 fingers the way you slap a friend who is crying, not to hurt them but to remind the skin of the shape of living. The needle jumped like a startled fish and settled to the mark we keep because history says it keeps us. "Sith," I said, and she heard what I did not say, and put her hand not on him but on the wheel that needed truth told to it, and turned without looking, and the ship registered our obedience and paid us the wage of a breath. The servo ball flared a blue you only see in old stars and shallow litanies. Its little auspex squealed like a mouse seeing rain. It sailed into Morel's eyeline and took his attention the way a thrown cup takes a quarrel's fever for a second. He blinked. I caught his wrist. It was hotter than it ought to have been. Pulse, a ridiculous fast festival under his skin. "Work," I said to the wrist. Not to him. We walked backward together, 1 step. The exchanger breathed in, disappointed as a curtain. On the next exhale I smelled fruit, rotten sweet, like offerings put where heat finds them. I gagged and swallowed because that is the decision you make if you want to see the next watch. He came back slow. You can feel when a man returns to a room he had been in with his eyes shut. He looked at me and did the thing men do when they do not wish to be seen, which is to grin, as if a joke had just arrived and you were late to it. The grin slid off his face like oil. "I heard," he said, and stopped. Because we had rules, and because saying it out loud makes a door even when the room is full of them. Rise's voice came clean on the vox, free of static. The way a father says your name in a crowd and expects you to hear it because you belong to the mouth that made it. "Hold," he said. "Hold close." We did. He did not ask for explanation. The ship groaned somewhere between the shrine and the spine, the noise ships make when the drive leans into the dark and the dark leans back. The pressure spike passed with the slow dignity of a train through a narrow tunnel. My vision came back in better colors. The hymn remembered where it was supposed to be. The second song did not retreat so much as sit down cross-legged and fold its hands as if to say, "I can be patient. I am old. I have eaten entire winters and learned from hunger. You will forget to eat someday. I will not." We finished the purge, and the little ping made by the widow's eye returned to its polite heartbeat. Sith's fingerprints cooled, their grooves dark in the lacquer, like a name cut shallow in stone by a man who did not know if anyone would come to trace it later. The frost at the seam turned back into water and then into air. I bent to wipe the wet with the rag and for a moment saw my face there, not in the reflection, but caught in the brightness of the metal as a man sees himself in a stranger's eye without asking to. The boy at the slat was gone. The breath bloom on the other side had drifted to a long oval like a mouth shaping a silent O and then vanished, a coin palmed by a good thief. My palm print remained. The oil thinned and ran and spelled nothing human. I thought then, with that clarity fear brings when it is done screaming and sits down in your ribs like a guest you did not invite, we are being weighed, not just watched. We are being taught our own mass the way a scale teaches flour. The hymn is the measure. The second melody is the counterweight. I used to think prayer built a wall you could stand behind and breathe. Now prayer feels like tapping on a glass and enjoying the echo so much you do not notice. The thing on the other side has learned the rhythm of your knuckles. Morel set his manual down on the altar and stepped back as if it were an animal. He rubbed his wrists where I had held him and left red on the skin that would turn to a bruise in the shape of my fingers. We will be told that was necessary. I will tell myself it was necessary. He looked small and not young. He looked like a child someone had fitted in a man's clothes in a hurry for a funeral. I could taste salt, he said in a voice not meant to confess, and when he realized he had confessed, he bit the words shut until they hurt. Oil, I lied, easy as breathing, because there is mercy in lies when they keep a mouth from becoming a door. Sith went about the little work that makes big work possible, fetching wicks, righting a loose cog in its dish, retying the tie on the drop cloth that keeps the altar's feet from rusting. She hummed the lullaby to herself, a child's code for a machine too old to be flattered by it. The lullaby answered in the plates with the humility of the obedient. The second melody answered too, not over it, but under, laying a hand on the child's head and smoothing the hair back as if to say, I can sing with you. I can be anything you want if you remember to want. The servo ball hovered low over panel theta and extended its claw as if to touch the glass, then retracted it, pricked with sentiment. It did a slow, pointless circle with the gravity of a thing trying to decide if it had already done what it had come to do. I could have sworn it sighed. It is a sin to put feelings on a machine to make it easier to talk to yourself. I sinned and was comforted. The next order came down with the weight of real danger attached to it. Brace for tidal. Brace for dusting, no external, all internal. The last phrase hit my stomach in a way the others did not. Dusting happens when old air finds new ways to fall. Internal means we had made the dust. The hymn tightened. The second song smiled. I could not see it. I know what music looks like when it believes it has been invited. We braced. I leaned my shoulder to the casing and spread my palm flat to share a skin with the ship so we would both know we were alive when it passed. The wave came sideways. The lights did not flicker. The candles did. The servitors missed a step and then found it, and then marched as if the miss could be erased by doing it right. Harder. The deck groaned. Something in the panel glass decided to be water for one long second, and then remembered it was trapped and turned itself back into clarity with embarrassment. The rail teeth chattered. The little cog the child had forgotten did a courtesy hop and lay back down as if to say, "Don't mind me." The wave left. My teeth stayed in my head. The ship's bones sang their thanks for not being asked to do that again too soon. I let the breath out I had stolen earlier and found it had turned into something else in my pocket, rancid, heavy, useful the way winter fat is. We were not dead. We were not whole in the way we had been 2 hours ago. Under the altar, the seam breathed in and out twice like a hound learning a new scent, and then went still, pretending innocence. I bent, palm out, not touching. Just enough that the hair on my wrist told me what air was doing there. The air had weight now. The kind of weight that sits on a chest between midnight and dawn and does not mean to hurt you, only to remind you your ribs are not as strong as you pretend. Present. The panel whispered inside the hymn's tail like a man slipping his hand into a river to guess its speed. I did not answer this time. Not with my mouth. I answered with a turn of a wheel just shy of need. I answered by setting the wick straight when there was no draft. I answered by taking Morel's manual and closing it and laying my palm on it for the length of 6 heartbeats so he would feel that the room had a floor. The second melody took my answers and put them on its tongue and tasted them and swallowed and sat, knees up, chin on them, smiling without teeth, patient as a season. I used to believe the warp was a storm you could shut the windows against. Now I am not sure it is not the hand at the latch, learning the way you breathe through the crack. The chapter titles had stopped mattering by then. We wrote them in the logs because the bridge expected them, but I could no longer tell where one watch ended and another began. Still, if I had to name it, I would call it the Hour of Listening, because that was all we did. The hymn was quieter now, paired to a single pulse, an organ keeping time with its own patient heartbeat. The second melody had learned to hum inside that rhythm. I could not separate the two anymore. When I closed my eyes, I could not tell whether I was breathing or the ship was, and that uncertainty was oddly gentle. You could almost mistake it for peace. Sith slept in short knots of time, sitting upright against the bulkhead, her eyes half open, as if watching something inside her lids. Morel had stopped writing entirely. His manual lay on the altar, the ink long dry, the teeth he'd drawn now faded to pale ghosts. Once, he reached for it in his sleep and whispered numbers that didn't exist, digits out of order, primes that should not be. I pressed his fingers back to his chest, whispered the proper count under my breath, and he quieted. The air was too clean. That was the first thing I noticed. The scrubbers in this section were never that efficient. The recycled tang was gone, replaced by a stillness that reminded me of a chapel long after the sermon has ended. I looked at the filter gauges flatlined, all of them, not broken, content, as if the ship had taken a deep breath and decided to hold it indefinitely. We worked through the motions anyway. Maintenance is a litany. Neglect is blasphemy. I checked the seals, turned the wheels, bled the lines, noted nothing that would make sense to the bridge. Each sound landed with more weight than it should. Even my own heartbeat seemed to echo off the walls. I could see the pulse in the panel glass, a soft vibration that didn't belong to me. At some point, the lights dimmed without permission. It wasn't a power fluctuation, the kind that hums like bees inside your bones. This was deliberate, thoughtful. The shadows rearranged themselves into patterns that resembled letters but never committed to being words. I counted them out of habit. They changed each time, like the ship was trying on different languages and couldn't decide which suited it best. Rise came once. He didn't bring the servo ball this time. He moved slower, his robes heavier, as if gravity itself had grown fond of him. "You've felt it," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I answered. "Then you know what follows," he said, placing his palm flat on the altar. The metal beneath his hand flushed a deeper color, almost like blood moving under skin. There's a moment when the Geller field becomes a prayer instead of a wall, when the sea stops outside and starts inside. That's when you must listen, not to it, to yourself. He looked older than he had an hour ago. "If you hear your name," he added, "ask who's saying it before you answer." Then he left, steps uneven, as if walking on a deck that tilted only for him. I kept listening. The hum grew slower, stretched thin as a thread you could pluck. Somewhere, deeper in the hull, a bell rang one of the mechanical alarms, but warped, like metal mourning its own sound. Sith startled awake. Merrill looked up, his eyes wide and dark, the color of oil. "Did you hear it?" he asked. "Yes." "What did it mean?" "That it's close," Sith murmured. None of us asked what it was. We had all learned the cost of naming. The servitors stopped walking. They froze mid-step, heads tilted toward the deck as if straining to hear something beneath it. Their tools hung idle, dripping small beads of oil that refused to fall. The air thickened. I realized then what the smell was, the same iron sweet note I'd caught after the last tide. Blood, but not human. The vox snapped to life, no prelude, just breath and static and a single syllable that might have been laughter. Then, maintain alignment. The voice wasn't Rise's. It wasn't anyone's. It carried the timbre of every voice I had ever known, folded together into one. Sith rose. "The hymn's dropping out of phase," she said, staring at the meters. "No," I said, "it's changing key." She looked at me, and I knew she could hear it too. The song beneath the song had overtaken the original. It wasn't discordant. It was beautiful in a way that hurt the bones. Each note bent towards something infinite. A horizon you could almost see if you just... I clamped my hands over my ears, though the sound was inside them. "Don't," Sith said sharply. "You feed it when you resist." Marel began to hum, low and tuneless. The same sequence the servitors had whispered days ago. I didn't stop him. He was steady, and steadiness was currency. I joined him, matching the rhythm. The ship shuddered once, then stilled. Like a beast soothed by its name spoken correctly. The lights brightened again, not to white, but to a soft amber, the color of sunrise through old glass. For the first time in days, I could see the mountain of wires above the altar clearly. They weren't just cables. They were woven, braided like hair, looping into patterns that almost resembled scripture. Each strand pulsed with faint light. I realized, with a calm that should have terrified me, that the ship was breathing through them. The panel glass shimmered, not misting, not frost movement. A silhouette behind it, the shape of a man standing on the other side of an impossible barrier. He lifted his hand. I knew the gesture before he made it. I had made it 100 times to test the seals. He pressed his palm to the glass, and a palm print bloomed there in return. My heart forgot its discipline. The print matched mine. He smiled. Not cruelly, not kindly, just enough to suggest familiarity. Sith whispered, "Don't move," but the figure leaned forward, and I could see his face, my face, except for the eyes, which were full of stars that weren't meant for human sight. The hymn faltered. The second melody swallowed the silence. Behind me, Marel began to pray the old words, those reserved for funerals, for moments when flesh must admit its limits. Sith joined, her voice steady, melodic, a thread pulling the world back into shape. I did not pray. I raised my hand and met my reflection's palm. The glass was warm. He mouthed something. I couldn't hear it, but I knew what it was. Present. The pressure shifted. The lights snapped to white. My reflection vanished. When the brightness faded, I was on the floor. Sith knelt beside me, one hand on my chest, checking pulse, the other gripping her rosarius so tightly that blood beaded where the edges cut. Marel was standing at the altar, staring at the panel. The hymn had resumed, thin but intact. The second melody was gone or waiting somewhere we couldn't hear. "What did you see?" Sith asked quietly. "Myself," I said. "Was it you?" "Yes," I answered, though I didn't believe it. Outside, through the slat, the stars burned wrong closer. Too bright, bending as if viewed through water. The ship had survived translation. We had survived the hymn's breaking, but the warp hadn't left. It was here now, inside the walls, inside the air, inside us. And when I closed my eyes, I could still feel the warmth of that palm against mine, steady, patient, waiting for me to answer again. The ship never sleeps after a crossing. The hull sighs and settles. Fluids resume their loops. The decks tilt infinitesimally as the grav coils correct what the warp disturbed. You learn to read those sounds as a kind of heartbeat, the body reminding itself that it still belongs to matter. That heartbeat was gone. I woke to stillness so complete it pressed on my eardrums. The light in the shrine was wrong again, not amber this time, but an even gray, the color of the space between two blinks. Sith was standing by the panel, one hand hovering a centimeter from the glass. Marel sat cross-legged on the floor, his manual open before him like scripture. I could see the faintest shimmer in the pages, as if the ink had remembered how to move. "How long?" I asked. 8 hours, Sith said. "If the clocks can be trusted." "Can they?" She shook her head. The servitors had not returned to their walk. They knelt instead, tools laid neatly before them, faces angled upward as though waiting for an unseen benediction. The hymn wasn't playing, but something used its rhythm to breathe. The deck plates lifted and fell by the width of a thumbnail, synchronized, like a sleeping creature dreaming under our boots. "We finished translation," Morel murmured, not looking up from his book. "But we didn't arrive." I didn't ask what he meant. The observation sat in the air like a scent. Rise hadn't checked in. No Vox, no relay ping. Either the bridge was silent or it had forgotten that we existed. In the distance, a machine coughed once and then fell still. The sound bounced back from somewhere that felt further away than the ship's dimensions allowed. Sith reached toward the panel at last and brushed her fingertips along its edge. "It's warm," she said. "Hotter than it should be." The glass rippled. She jerked her hand back. The warmth spread down into the metal beneath her palm, running like veins toward the altar. Every light in the room flared, once white, pure, blind, and then dimmed to the color of blood seen through water. "Marel," I said. He closed the book. "It's trying to speak. Then don't answer." He smiled faintly. "You already did." The panel's surface moved again, slow this time, like lungs inhaling. The frost that had been dormant since the crossing reappeared and began to crawl upward, leaving behind clear trails that formed shapes too deliberate to be random. I recognized them, not letters, pulse signatures. Each one, a heartbeat traced in light. Mine. Sith's. Marel's. The glass pulsed once for each of us, in perfect sequence. Then all three signatures aligned and held. The lights cut out. For a moment there was only breath, the sound of 3 lungs trying to find a rhythm not their own. Then the dark turned translucent. Shapes moved inside it, silhouettes pressed against the thin skin of the world. I saw the outline of Rise among them, robes tattered, Vox mask cracked open like a peeled fruit. He lifted his hand the same way the reflection had. Sith whispered a litany. Marel's voice joined hers, and the syllables stuck to the air like frost. The dark pulsed with every word they spoke, expanding, contracting, like something alive pressed close to the barrier. Listening, I wanted to believe it was still the ship, but the ship doesn't listen. The voice that came through the dark was quiet, measured. It wore Rise's timbre, but not his restraint. "The field has fallen inward," it said. "You are inside the prayer." I stepped forward despite myself. The panel met my gaze. Behind it, the silhouettes moved closer. Some had too many arms. Some had mouths where eyes should be. They didn't press against the glass, they leaned, as if waiting for permission to enter. Sith's hymn grew louder. Her voice cracked but didn't stop. Morel dropped his manual. The pages flared white and then black, burning without heat. I reached for the purge valve instinctively, the way a drowning man reaches for the ladder rung he knows won't hold. The pressure gauge twitched, fell to 0, and then turned backward. The numbers uncounted themselves. Sith gasped. "They're in the lines." I spun the wheel until my knuckles bled, but the valve refused to move. The ship's heartbeat returned louder this time. Faster, wild. The deck vibrated under my feet, each pulse echoing through my teeth. I could feel it learning me, matching rhythm, pulling my own pulse into time with its own. Morel was laughing softly now, a sound that barely broke the air. "It's not outside anymore," he said. It never was. The panel flared open, not shattered, not broken, just open. Light poured through, cold and heavy. The silhouettes stepped forward, and the air split with the smell of ozone and salt. Sith screamed my name. But the sound warped halfway through, folding back on itself like tape reversing. I turned toward her and saw her frozen mid-motion, every droplet of sweat hanging around her like glass beads. Time had slowed to watch. I could still move, the light pressed against my chest, and something inside me recognized it not as alien, but as familiar. The same warmth that had touched my hand through the glass, the same pulse that had been counting inside my ribs since the crossing. It wasn't trying to enter. It was trying to finish what it had already started. I took one step forward. The last thing I saw was my reflection forming again in the glass, smiling, patient, lips moving with a word I couldn't hear but already understood. Then everything inverted. There was no sound, no sight, just a pressure behind the eyes like a thought too large to fit inside a skull. When the light receded, I was standing in the same place, but the ship was silent again. The frost had melted. Sith and Morel were breathing, eyes open, untouched. The servitors had resumed their walk. The hymn played, soft and perfect, as if nothing had ever interrupted it. But the rhythm was mine now. Each note matched my heartbeat. And when I spoke the first word of the litany, the echo that answered was not my voice, but it was me. The hymn began before I could reach for it. No instruments, no vox, no command from the bridge. It bloomed inside my skull like breath behind glass, measured, slow, merciful. I tasted oil when I exhaled. The smell of burnt insulation had become familiar, almost comforting. We had survived translation, or perhaps translation had survived us. It was difficult to tell what had been inverted. The shrine still existed, the altar, the valves, the worn handprints where generations of acolytes had steadied themselves. But the color of everything had changed. Brass was no longer brass, steel no longer steel. Each surface seemed to glow from within, as if the ship were remembering the light of some other Sunday. Sith moved carefully, as though her limbs belonged to a different gravity. "It's quiet," she said. "Too quiet," Morel replied automatically, his voice stripped of irony. "Rise?" I asked the vox. The line answered with a single pulse of static, soft, rhythmic, familiar. A heartbeat, my own. I should have been afraid. But fear requires distance, and there was no distance left in me. The warp had closed that gap, neatly, gently, like stitching a wound. Morel had begun to draw again. His fingers trembled as he pressed the stylus to the last blank page of his manual. At first, I thought he was writing coordinates, but the lines bent in on themselves, spiraling into a shape that hurt to focus on. "It wants a door," he murmured, "and we're the hinges." Sith slammed the manual shut. "Stop," she said. Her voice cracked on the word. "That's not writing anymore." He looked up at her, confused, almost wounded. "It told me your name," he said. "Sithra." She went still. No one knew her true name. The hymn deepened, low enough that the deck vibrated in sympathy. The servitors responded as if on cue, stepping forward in unison, heads turning toward us. For the first time, I realized none of them had faces anymore. The flesh had receded, smooth and pale like candle wax. Their tools glinted, freshly oiled, perfectly aligned. One by one, they knelt. Morel dropped the manual. It landed open on the floor, the strange lines now moving across the page on their own, a slow, deliberate dance. The ship's lights pulsed in time with the ink. Sith whispered a fragment of the cleansing litany. "Light within light, Emperor preserve the shell of man." Her voice faltered on the final word. The syllables did not want to leave her mouth. I touched her arm. "Don't speak it," I said. "It's listening." She looked at me, eyes wide and glassy. "Then what are we supposed to do?" "Finish the work," I heard myself answer. But the words didn't come from thought. They arrived fully formed, as if I had rehearsed them in another life. I turned toward the altar. The pressure gauges were steady, needles centered in perfect alignment. The ship was too stable. Every system that should have screamed after a crossing sat in obedient silence. Only the lights moved, pulsing gently like the rise and fall of breath. A new line appeared on the display screen. Synchrony achieved. Human element integrated. I blinked. The line vanished. Morel started laughing quietly at first, then louder, his voice rising until it sounded almost joyous. Sith tried to hush him, but he stepped back, eyes unfocused. "Do you hear it?" he asked. "It's not outside anymore. It's here. In us. It loves us." The servitors began to hum. Not the ship's hymn, something older, simpler, like children learning a tune by ear. The sound scraped at the edges of my teeth. The panel glass rippled once more. This time, there was no reflection waiting, only a vastness that shimmered like oil on water, full of depth and color without distance. The longer I looked, the more it resembled the warp viewed through the bridge auspex but inverted, folded inward. A sea turning itself inside out. I should have turned away. I didn't. The surface flexed. Shapes moved beneath, rising. Not forms, not faces, possibilities. They brushed the other side of the glass like moths testing silk. Each touch left a faint smear of light, bright and fading, bright and fading. My body understood before my mind did. The warmth in my chest was back, steady and patient. It pulsed once, twice, and the glass answered. Sith screamed my name, but it came from far away. Morel was still laughing, though blood had begun to seep from his nose. The servitors had stopped moving altogether. Their heads tilted toward me, mouths open in silent praise. I stepped closer to the altar. The ship's hum thickened. I could feel the rhythm aligning with my pulse again, but this time, it wasn't matching mine. I was matching its. "Yosef," Sith whispered. "Don't." I didn't know how to explain that I wasn't doing anything. I was being done. The glass swelled outward, a perfect sphere forming from its center. Within it, a light turned slowly, a spiral that might have been a galaxy or a wound. I reached out, and the air between my hand and the surface rippled like heat over sand. My skin prickled. It wasn't pain. It was recognition. Every thought I'd ever had, every prayer, every small act of obedience, they weren't mine. They were echoes of this moment, rehearsed through lives I didn't remember. I was born to complete this gesture. I placed my palm on the glass. It was no longer warm. It was alive. The ship exhaled. Every light went out. Every sound ceased. In the perfect silence that followed, I heard the warp speak with my own voice. Present, the silence after the word was not empty. It had a texture, a slow roll like cloth rubbed between finger and thumb. When the lights returned, they did not snap back so much as open their eyes. And the shrine looked as if it had been waiting for us to understand it. Sith's breath came in little pairs. Morel's laughter had quieted to a soft hiccuping, as if his body had forgotten the choreography of joy. The servitors rose and resumed their walk on knees that remembered obedience better than joints. Nothing broke, nothing shouted. I found my hand still on the glass, and the glass as warm as skin, and the warmth answering me with a pulse that was not mine, and yet timed me perfectly. Sith said my name in a voice you use for a sleeping child when you hope he will choose to wake. I tried to turn, and the ship turned with me a hair's breadth later, like a shadow teaching a body how to move. "I'm here," I said, and the Vox picked up the phrase and repeated it through the deck in a thinner tone, and the panel wrote it as a line in pale light, and something in the lines of the altar's veins dilated, content to have learned a new trick. I let go. The warmth stayed. A mark in my palm glowed, small as a coin, bright as a coal that had not decided to die yet. We tested a valve. It resisted like a jaw clenched in prayer. We tested a seal. It accepted the blessing but not the purpose. The gauges held at the middle, as if middle were a sacrament. Scythe reached for the emergency purge and her hand shook, not from fear, but because the handle buzzed faintly with the kind of current we do not wire here. "Yosef," she said again. And this time when she said it, the panel ghosted the word in breath on the inside of the glass, and then wiped it clean like a throat. Morel swayed and put his fingers to his nose, brought them away wet and red, and watched the red bead itself into tidy spheres that did not fall until he told them to. "It loves us," he said again, not in wonder but like a man counting shell casings after a fight, because the number matters more than the bullets did. His manual lay open at his feet. The ink moved still, slow now, as if tired, drawing a small spiral and then stopping with the humble courtesy of a scribe at the end of a line. He bent to touch it. The page rose like a diaphragm under breath and then flattened, embarrassed. I tried the bridge. The relay gave me back my own heartbeat and laid a second behind it that waited until mine arrived and then sat in the space it had left, content as a cat. "Rise?" Sith asked the room because rooms sometimes answer better than machines. Something like Rise stepped through the slat, the shadow of the man, robed where shadows fold, mask where the dark is densest. He raised his palm. I did not raise mine. He blurred, softened, thinned to fine smoke, and the smoke curled along the seam of the deck and vanished between plates that were not plates anymore but a lid over a mouth that had learned to be polite. Sith moved first. She is gifted that way. Action is a ritual when ritual is broken. She began the cleansing verse, not loud, not defiant, slow and exact as a woman washing a dead child. Marel joined. I tried. My mouth filled with the taste of hot copper and old paper, and I understood I could not speak those words with my tongue anymore, because my tongue was not where the prayer lives now. So I laid my palm on the altar where the brass is thinnest, and I let the pulse in the metal take the shape of the verse, and the room answered in the bones of the deck with a low amen. And the lights steadied, and the second melody backed its chair away from the table, just far enough to be considered courteous. We worked through the list, not because the list had power, but because men do when they are small. The ship let us. It hummed the numbers back when Marel lost his place, and when Sith touched the pressure wheel and asked it for 6 degrees, the needle went to 6 as gently as a bishop laying 2 fingers on a bowed head, and when I wrote the reading in the log, my handwriting repeated itself a fraction of a second later, in the lower margin, the letters cleaner than mine, like a son trying to please a father he would in the end become. At the end of the hour, Marel reached for the manual again and made the sign before he remembered, "Signs do not keep you from falling, they teach you how." "Does it hurt?" he asked me without looking up. "No," I said, and knew at once that was not the question he had meant. He smiled, as if I had given him permission not to ask it again. He coughed, then, soft and surprised, and a small clot came into his palm, the way an apology comes into the throat. And when he swallowed and tried to stand, his knees refused with perfect manners. He sat back down. He did not fall. He lay his head on the altar edge and listened to what I could hear now without placing my ear to the brass, the slow sleep breath the ship had learned from us. "It loves us," he said once more. But his voice had the flatness of men speaking in their sleep after the dream has gone on without them. Sith folded a cloth under his cheek. Neat corners, the kind of dignity a priest gives a beggar when he cannot give bread. Rise did not come again. The servo ball came alone, light dimmed to the blue of a bruise, and pitched itself in a slow orbit that did not touch anything holy. It paused over my hand where the coal mark was, and it clicked. A little stutter, as if a tiny animal in its throat had begun to purr and did not know what to do next. "We need to report," Sith said, looking at the ball as if it could take dictation. "We need to say what we did." I almost smiled then because the thought had the clean shape of a thing from before. "We did not do." I said, "We were done." "Then say that," she said, and the ball chirped twice, which is the code for receipt, and drifted to the slat as if it meant to take the message to a place where men still keep them. The next tide was small. You would not have noticed it if you were not listening for the way light changes tone when it is asked to carry weight. The hymn flexed down a note and held. The second melody turned its head away long enough to be kind. The panel glass breathed in and out once and then left its surface exactly as it had found it. Dust settled out of air, too clean to hold dust. The mark in my palm cooled to the temperature of a memory. Meryl slept. Sith came and sat beside me on the deck and did not touch me. She is gifted that way too. "Can you stop it?" she asked, conversational, like a woman speaking of weather to a man who has moved into the wind. I did not answer at once. I lay my hand flat to the casing and tried to call the gears by their right names, the way old men call grandchildren to dinner from the far end of a field. They came. They came too quickly. They came like dogs when you have fed them warm meat. "I can shape it," I said finally. "I cannot refuse it." She nodded as if that was a thing that could be lived with. She put her head back against the bulkhead and shut her eyes. "Then make it gentle." It was not an order, and so it could be obeyed. I eased the hymn to the old key. It took the pitch, sat in it like a saint in an empty chair, eyes down, hands still. I bent the pressure a finger's width to the safer side. The gauge moved as though it had always meant to do so and was grateful for the excuse. In the lines, I felt something move that was not fluid, not power attention. Perhaps, like a hand brushing past the fringe of a curtain to see if the room beyond is yet ready. It found me, paused, and then, and this was the worst of it, it retreated in respect. The kindest cruelties are the ones you choose because they make you feel you decided. We held like that through the watch and the next, and in the second the servo ball returned alone and wrote on the slat with its little laser in shorthand. Sith and I could both read. Bridge dark. Prayer only. She wiped the line away with the sleeve of her robe and left a clean stripe and said nothing, and we all agreed with her. Morel woke long enough to sip water and call me by a name I had not told him I had ever had. And then, he slept the way men sleep when they are being remembered elsewhere, by someone who liked them. When the order came, it did not come on vox or ink or ball. It came through the deck, through the pulse I had learned to carry, a simple shift in timing, the way a choir master lifts two fingers when he wants the note to end on a breath and not a choke. We braced. I did not reach for the rail. I reached for my own ribs and pressed, and the ship pressed with me, and we came through to a place that had coordinates and a sky that had the decency to be black. The slat showed a planet like an old coin, worn and honest. The hymn held. The second melody sat back with its knees under its chin and smiled as if to say, "See, we can do this without breaking the furniture if we all agree not to mind the guests." We were met. Docking chimes. Human footsteps where human footsteps go. Scythe stood. She straightened her robe and smoothed her hair with 3 fingers and kissed her rosarius and put it back in a pocket where I could not see it, and then remembered she did not need to hide it from me anymore. Marel woke for the last time and looked around the shrine as if the room were a story he had finished as a child and now understood was about someone else. He said the word, "Mother," and I realized it was for the ship. He smiled at his own rudeness, apologized under his breath, and lay back down. He did not get up when the klaxons announced we had docked. Rise walked in on legs that belonged to gravity again, mask whole, eyes old. He stopped 2 paces in and set both hands on the rail as if it were an altar, which I suppose it had always been. He took us in Seath standing, Meryl sleeping, me with my palm flat on the altar because that is where it lives now. He nodded once, and the nod contained so much tired worship I nearly told him to keep it for himself. "Report," he said softly. Seath opened her mouth. I shook my head and she closed it and stepped back and let me. I did not speak to him. I spoke to the ship, because that is how it is done now. And the ship said the words in the vox in a voice that had been mine. It told him what we had done. He listened like a man hearing his child pronounce a prayer very well indeed, and understanding precisely what that means later. "Can we make port?" he asked. To me. To it. I slid the pressure a hair, played the hymn, a fraction sweet, held the second melody by the hand like a boy at the edge of a cliff. "We can go anywhere," I said. And for once, I did not mean it as pride. He nodded again. He looked at the mark in my palm and then at my face the way a doctor looks at a wound that has healed to the wrong shape and will work but will never be right. "You will stay with her," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said, and the ship hummed yes under my skin. He bowed, old-fashioned, improper, kind, and left us to our work. We unloaded. The hymn grew thin at the edges when the doors opened to honest air, like a candle in a room with windows. Men came and went who did not know our names and did not need to. The servo ball followed one of them partway down the corridor and then returned to its bay like a bird unwilling to migrate. Sith looked at me a long time without saying what her mouth could not carry without cracking. "I will ask to be assigned here," she said finally, as if we were discussing bunks. "If they let me." "If they do not," I said, "you will still be here." She nodded because she knows how to agree with something that hurts. Her fingers brushed the altar once in passing, as if to check a child's fever. She went to find a chaplain who would take confession she could not give. Morel did not wake again. He did not die loudly. He did not need to. He had already gone to where his name was written in a hand kinder than mine. We laid him on the cloth. We traced the cog on his brow. The ship hummed the last note of the litany for those who have been broken in proper service. I tasted salt and oil and the dust of manuals left shut too long. I stroked the page where his ink had moved, and the line there curled in on itself and stopped with grace like a bow at the end of a piece. I stayed. Of course I did. I stood my watches with my palm on the altar and my breath under the hymn and the second melody like a cat on the back of a chair, watching birds outside a window and not pouncing because it is not ready to show me all the ways it is. Kind. Sometimes in the slat I see a boy press his palm to the glass and I raise mine and we meet. And I do not ask whether he is outside or I am, because the answer is work, and the work does not change. Sometimes the panel writes present in small, careful letters, and I do not answer because I am busy turning a wheel, a precise number of degrees learned from the mouths of older men. I used to believe the machine hymn kept the sea out. Now I keep the hymn, and the sea keeps me. I am wall, and latch, and hinge. And if I lean too far, the door opens, and if I hold too hard, the room forgets it has windows. Sith's laugh still lives in the quiet of the gauges. Rise's nod still waits the rail. Maro's pencil line waits at the bottom of the page like a road we will take when the orders say so. They said the Emperor protects. I think he just watches. And I, who used to ask to be unseen, have become the prayer that refuses to stop being heard. Sometimes the hymn stops before I do. I finish it alone. The flesh was weak, yes, but it was the only thing that ever learned how to say no.